Thank you, everyone. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Cheryl Gardner, Chief Administration Officer for Midmark Corporation and a member of the PWH Advisory Board. Welcome, Cheryl.
Good morning. It's great to be here, and before I introduce Steve, I have to say one thing. Those of you, I've been around about 11 years at Midmark, and I'll never forget my first PWH meeting. It was in some little tiny conference room in a hotel with no windows. I'll never forget it. Ann drugged me along, and she said, "You got to come." And there was this very small group of women, and they were all talking at once because they had so many ideas and so many great things to do in this industry, and we've come a long way, baby. So with that said, it's my privilege to introduce to you our guest speaker this morning, Steve Mason, who is the president of Cardinal Health at Home, which is a best-in-class provider of medical supplies to patients in the home. He has been with Cardinal for 20 years and has experience across all aspects of end-to-end commercialization in the healthcare industry. He is actively engaged in Cardinal Health employee resource groups as a steering committee member for the Women's Initiative Network, executive sponsor for the Equality Network, and executive sponsor for the Enterprise Diversity and Inclusion Steering Council. Clearly is demonstrating his commitment to this topic that he's about to present, gender equity, engaging men and women in full partnership at work. Please give a warm PWH welcome to Steve Mason.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. What an awesome morning. First off, I'd like to thank all the presenters this morning, and with everybody would give them a round of applause. It was awesome. Nice job. And by the way, I will tell a funny story before I jump in. This morning I came in to just make sure that my notes was laid out, and I kid you not, I walked off with someone else's notes. So it's like the worst thing you could do to a presenter is they're getting ready to present and their notes are gone. So I thought maybe I would be punked and my notes would be gone at this point, but good news, my notes are still here. So I apologize for that, but that was the way someone's day started. I could not be more excited to be here. One of my number one passions at work is driving gender partnership. And it is incredibly important, and hopefully today through a series of some data that I plan to share and experiences that we can figure out how we take some things that I think work and put them to action going forward. One thing I wanted to say too, please give a round of applause for the men that are here in the audience. We need more. Rochelle and I were actually just talking a little bit ago about how do we start to change that, because as we go through today, we're certainly all going to figure out that this is an equal partnership and it requires engagement by all. So here's what I'd like to cover today. First off, I'm going to go through what I perceive as today's reality. I'm going to talk about why gender partnership matters to me, and then also what I've learned, how I take action, and then also, as the day wraps up, hopefully have some discussion around what are some things that we can do together. So you're gonna be with me here for quite a bit this morning. I thought it would be helpful to give you a little background about who I am, and so I see the laughs right away here, and I'm going to say a couple things. First off, this is my family, and I'm from Columbus, Ohio. I went to Ohio State. OHR, I knew I would get it. That's very exciting. I didn't fall very far from the tree, but a couple things I'd call out. I never can tell anyone that I have 4 daughters without them looking at me and saying, "Oh, wow, that's a lot of weddings." And so I have a solution, and I've talked about this solution for quite a while. I think there's some winners and losers in this solution. I'm just going to do one wedding, and it's for all 4 of them combined. So they have to kind of figure out how that's going to, someone will be a winner and loser, but I'm pretty sure. Now, the second thing I'll call out, which is why I think the laughs happened, my now 14-year-old daughter there in the middle apparently is going to be some form of model, because she strikes a pose like I've never seen. In every picture we have anywhere, she is always striking some form of pose, so she's taken over. My first job out of college was with Cardinal Health. So when you do all the math, I didn't fall very far from the tree. I'm from Columbus, went to Ohio State, little company in Cardinal. What little company was growing in healthcare in the early 90s was Cardinal Health. Entry level, number puncher. I mean, the first job, if I told you what I did, it was the most mindless job you've ever imagined. But Cardinal has been where I've built up my career. I even left for a short time in the late 90s, but culturally, it was something that I've loved and I came back to, and it's where I've had the pleasure of building out my career. Now, as I've progressed through my career, one of the things that has been, I've been fortunate, it's been a great place culturally to work. It's been a great place to build a career. And I want to call out a couple roles that I've had because they're really important as I start to get into some of the actions that I've taken. In the progression, somewhere along the lines, I got tapped on the shoulder to go run a business that had been recently acquired by Cardinal, call it within a couple years. And I came in to run that business. That business was called Kinray. It was out of New York City. Really great business to bring into Cardinal. And the second, which is where I am now, which is Cardinal Health at Home, exact same situation, recently acquired by Cardinal, leadership team leaves, and then I've had the pleasure to come in and lead these businesses. I call that out because I view my role as one incredibly important thing. I step in and I try to grab the best of both cultures, and keep the differentiators intact. It's that simple. In fact, somewhere along the line, people call me like the post-acquisition specialist because at the end of the day, I come in and that's what I do. I call that out for a very important reason, which is usually when these businesses have been acquired, they haven't necessarily followed what I think is a really important component around diversity and inclusion that Cardinal has. So you'll see that in quite a few different things today. Now, back in October, I had the opportunity to participate in and be part of a gender equity summit. I know Rochelle was there, Therese Grassi, quite a few folks had the opportunity to attend. And there was some data that was shared during that conference. Tracy Nowski with McKinsey & Company came in and presented. And some of that information I thought was really relevant, and I wanted to share it with you today as we frame up some of the actions that I think we need to take. Now, this report and data that Tracy went over with the group, it's based on the Women in the Workplace studies that McKinsey's done in conjunction with the Lean In Foundation. And they survey and research, it's about 200 companies that participate that encompasses about 12 million employees. So this is sizable data that I think gives it some credibility and relevance. And one of the first things that Tracy shared with the group that I thought was pretty interesting, which was the companies in the top quartile that had the best gender representation in the C-suite. Well, surprisingly enough, I think everyone would know, they performed better. And not only did they perform better, not just a little bit better, but if you look at the average return on earnings at 55% based on the average companies, who doesn't want that? Raise your hand if you don't want that for the businesses. And by the way, so I contemplated whether I should say this or not, but I'm going to. I want that over McKesson, certainly day in and day out. I met Joan last night, and Joan and I, so I can dig a little fun, and I accidentally said that out loud, didn't I? I didn't mean to. But certainly, hey, come on, we all run businesses. We want to be successful, and certainly we know that none of us, I don't think any of us run nonprofits, and so this is really important data point. So, what's the next question that you would ask yourself? Why? Why do the companies that have a greater representation of women in the leadership positions perform better? This might be one of the favorite slides that I share today, because one of the things throughout my career, and I'll get into some of these stories, that has always stood out for me, which is I've had the pleasure of being surrounded by some amazing women leaders. And I'm going to say this out loud too, just like I shouldn't have said the McKesson comment. I've always thought women were better leaders than men. And I couldn't necessarily put my finger on what are the reasons why. And this slide really helped highlight that. Women exhibit 5 out of 9 leadership behaviors more often than men. Now, McKinsey's data, and I'll be fair, in their slides, they bold highlights say they are not saying women are better leaders than men, but here's the conclusion I think we need to take from this. Combined together, women and men perform better because of the fact that they flex different leadership positions. I think that's absolutely very important to call out as we think about the importance of gender partnership at work. So, if you're doing the math, companies perform better. When women and men are in greater equal concentration in leadership, that drives performance. So I'd like to be reporting to you that we're making significant, fast progress to full partnership at work. Right? That's what I want to be reporting. Now, here's something else that came out of the McKinsey data. So I want everybody to absorb this in a little bit. Based on the data, it's going to take 100 years to get to equality in the C-suite. 100 years. By the way, so I had to think about, how do I put this into context so that we can understand how long is 100 years? So exactly 100 years ago, World War I ended. Another one, women couldn't vote 100 years ago. I mean, this seems completely, first off, unacceptable. Everyone agree? Yeah. Unacceptable. Now, I'm inquisitive just like all of you. What's the reason for this? So, when you look at the reason, it could be best described that there is a leaky pipeline of women in each progression of their career. So it's staggering when you look at entry level. We start losing women in the workplace before their first promotion. And then obviously you can go across, you can do the math. The reason that this takes so long is because of that leaky pipeline. Now, when you think about this, I put in a quote, but it's not there. That's really great. The quote, actually, when you think about this, you just think of an empty road going nowhere. There is that's pretty funny. So the quote. The best way to predict the future is to create it. I'll tell you in a second who said that. One of the greatest change leaders in history said that quote because he knew the things that he saw weren't right and you had to do something about it. And it was Abraham Lincoln that said the quote of nothing on the page. But that's what our task is here today. So, I want to go through some personal stories around why gender equity matters to me. First of all, I grew up with a single mother and 2 brothers in a very low socioeconomic situation, and I watched my mother struggle trying to manage a career and raise boys and not get advancement. And so I grew up with a little bit of a lens of that. You saw I have 4 daughters. I've got actually one in the workforce. I've got three in the bullpen that are preparing for that. 4 college education. You can do the math all the time. But also, as importantly, I've had some really important professional experiences that have influenced my engagement in full partnership at work. And I'd call that out. So the first sales leadership job I ever got was back in 2004. And I, by the way, I remember this like it was yesterday. I mean, think about how excited you are when you get your first leadership job. And so I had 4 managers reporting to me. I was flying out to meet one of them in Jackson, Mississippi. He picks me up at the airport. We drive over to the distribution center, and here I am to come in to meet my team. When I walked into a room with 13 middle-aged white guys. I mean, kid you not. And so we call on retail pharmacies. And the first thing I thought of, which is, by the way, I've been in a lot of retail pharmacies, and there's certainly women in those pharmacies. There's women pharmacists, there's women customers. We have absolutely no insight into our customers because of that. And just think about that. That wasn't that long ago, if you really do the math on that. I could do that math quickly, too. So that's one thing, and immediately afterwards, I remember his name was Robert Cliff. He's the greatest guy ever, and I said, Robert, we have to change this. And obviously it was his team, and we had to do some work around that. The exact same time, one of my 4 white male leaders positions opened up, and so I made the decision. First decision I've made, where I think it started my journey on gender partnership, was I'm going to fill that with a diverse leader. And so I went down that process. I went immediately, where would you all go? You would go to one of your highest performing female or diverse leaders. That's where I went. So I went straight to her, brought her in, and said, I would like to give you this sales manager job because you're a great salesperson, you got great leadership skills. I didn't even finish my sentence. And she said no. And so think of all the things I don't know yet around the fact that why would she want to be part of this team where nobody looks like her, nobody thinks like her, and so she turned me down flat. And so I continued to try to fill this role, call it for 5 or 6 weeks, and then out of nowhere, Friday night, 5 o'clock, she picks up the phone, she calls me, and she just with no explanation, I want the job. Which, by the way, I was thrilled about. I still, to this day, would say, I'm not exactly sure what went through, and I'll talk a little bit about the things I've learned that I should have had better visibility to at the time as to why she turned me down flat. But the good news is, well, it seemed like good news, she said yes. Guess what happened next? So next, I started to get all kinds of questions from my leadership around, why am I trying to hire someone with limited experience? You just go down a whole list of things. Then I had trouble paying her what the other male managers made because I wasn't even in the same hemisphere. So I fought that battle. So I went through some battles. But I tell you these things because these experiences early in my career taught me something. First is, I was doing it just because I thought it was the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. I have daughters. My mother struggled, et cetera. But guess what we learned over the next few years? We learned how to solve problems better. We learned how to capture opportunities. I knew more about my customers. The results got better. It went from being something that was the right thing to do, and it went into we got better as a result of it. Now, when you flash forward into those 2 situations, the team I mentioned in Jackson, Mississippi, it's greater than 50% female now. They've knocked the ball out of the park for years. An awesome team. The female leader that turned me down flat. Now think about this. This is really important. She turned me down flat in the beginning of that leaky pipeline, where you saw it in the individual contributor side. Turns me down flat. Today, she leads a team of 125 or so, $11 billion of responsibility, an incredible leader. And it all started right there with basically me trying to force her into taking the job, but we as a company were better off as a result of it. So that's kind of like my journey through the early 2000s that helped form the way I think today. Now, Cardinal in 2011 did something that I look back on that was incredibly smart. So anybody in this room ever seen Mike Hoffman speak at any events? I know there's probably a few hands. He's our CEO. He's a 28-year Cardinal employee. He's an amazing champion for gender diversity. And so he had the foresight to go out and hire a group, the Women's Institute for Leadership, run by Rayona Shapnick. And we started a program that was called Women Leading Change. And the hypothesis was, we're going to go out, we're going to find our talented female leaders, and we're going to train them on how to do projects better, how to feel more confident, great, founded in some really good thought. But then you all know something else. You saw it on the pipeline. Who makes the majority of the decisions to hire? Men. Who sit in most of the executive positions? Men. So he also acknowledged it takes a very different level of education and engagement of men to help them understand this. So women leading change turned into partners leading change. And what partners leading change was, it was a very extensive 3-day, 10 hours a day, dinners, training program that helped educate on this exact subject. So what did I take away from it? First off, I will call this out, and I see Therese has been, raise your hand if you've been through it, if you're a Cardinal. It was really uncomfortable. And by the way, remember, I just told all of you, I get it, right? I've had some good experiences. I'm rocking and rolling. I'm changing the team dynamic. We're getting things done. But man, did it teach me a lot of things that I didn't know. So I started to learn about my unconscious biases. I got a better feeling for what women experience in the in the workplace. So think about what women experience in the workplace. Remember back to the manager to the to-be manager that turned me down. I mean, I wasn't thinking about work-life balance. I wasn't thinking about geographic location and some other things that I'll get into. So that helped me there. There's also something else that came out of it. Two more things. First off, it was like Cardinals' commitment. This is okay. And when the majority of the leaders are male, that's an important thing to know, that your organization has your back, whether you see the benefits or you think it's the right thing to do. It doesn't matter. The organization does help drive that. It was good reaffirmation of that. But there's one thing, and this is always really uncomfortable to talk about, but it's so true. I learned about my privilege of being a white male. I am privileged, whether I knew it or not. Now, my whole career, I thought differently about that. I grew up low socioeconomic, single mother, worked my way through college. I did all these different things. But it taught me that was a fact. So not only for all the reasons I just said have I been so engaged on that, I actually think it's my duty to help change that as a result of this privilege that I had no control over throughout my career. All right, so where I sit today, I put together what I kind of follow as a formula to help drive change, and there's quite a few different stories involved in this, but I'd like you to go with me on kind of what's my formula to drive change. So number one, talk about it. I know that sounds so elementary, but I can tell you, of anything else I'm about to go through, talking about it was one of the most difficult things that I had to start to learn and flex like a muscle. And so what does it mean to talk about it? So I speak up when women aren't represented on teams. In talent review discussions, I make sure other men don't make assumptions for women, whether they could travel, whether there's a work-life balance issue, whether they'll relocate. I've seen this happen so many times, and I learned how to uncomfortably, with generally a group full of men, say, hey, whoa, slow down. You need to go ask them about that, and let's let them decide if that's the case. I call out when I see high potential lists and they're underrepresented by women, and I'll get into some very specific numbers as to why that is such a big deal. The other thing that I do, and this is probably the most unpopular one of all, you got to try to change the conversation that happens day in and day in at work, and it makes me cringe. When I go into meetings and I hear, there's usually more men than women, right? I hear them talking sports. I hear them talking, they use military analogies. The one that's worse, and by the way, I fully admit I was guilty of, making comments that sound funny around women's spending habits. I.E., my wife, and I saw Amazon was here. Amazon lives in my house. I mean, when we lived in New York for quite a few years, when we moved, the UPS driver gave my wife a hug. I mean, he was here. He was there. He was every day. But that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to change the conversation. The other is, when we think about performance discussions, I include that in the conversation. I talk about it with my direct reports. And an example I would give here is about a year ago, I had a leader who took over a team, and he was totally qualified for the job, and he knew how to do the X's and O's. And that's not what I wanted to talk to him about. I laid out right in front of him, and I basically said, hey, you have a challenge. There's not a single diverse manager or above on your entire team. You've got to figure out how to change that. And a year later, the makeup of that team is significantly different. And you have to wonder if we didn't include that in our conversations, would that have happened or not? Take action. So number 2, take action. This is probably one of the most important ones on the page as it relates to what I lean into. And by the way, taking action is designed to do something very important: move the numbers. Because by the way, none of this matters if we don't get closer to shaving off some years of the 100 years. We have to get closer to this. So how do we do that? First off, you saw the beginning of the pipeline. When we think of promotions at individual contributor to manager, we attempt to do that at about 50%. So, because 50% of the population is male and female. But when you get into manager to director, director to VP, we need to do this at a disproportional forward promotion rate. So we strive for around 75%. And I'll get into how that all works out mathematically. We need to think different. We've taken steps to think different about geographical locations. So a lot of the reasons why you can't bring talented, diverse leaders into places is they're geographically locked. We've taken actions to think differently about that. We hold roles open when we want to fill. So in other words, you can't disproportionately promote if you don't have the ability or you make it okay for the organization to hold roles open. We require diverse slates for all roles that we fill. So as a team, we take that action as well. So back to setting bold goals, and this is the reason I had mentioned the Kinray business as long as Cardinal Health at Home. So when I got to Kinray, the first year I was there, the representation of manager and above was call it just slightly below 20%. And being the new leader, first GM job, I'm like, I'm going to make a big difference. We're going to get that to 50% in 2 years. That was my goal. I went through Partners Leading Change at the time. That was my project. I had steps on how I was going to get there, and we didn't get there in 2 years. But we got there in 3 years. So in 3 years, we went from slightly under 20% of diverse representation at the manager level to 50% when I left. I was there for about 3 years, which took all those things I just said. You had to do them to be able to change the numbers. Cardinal Health at Home. I've been there for about 2 years. And when I got there, call it the representation just under 30%. Today, we're at 36%. So making some good progress. But more importantly than that, so if you think about what we talked about on what drives performance at the C-suite level, when we think of our executive level, when I got there, it was 17% at the executive level represented by female leaders. And today it's at 36%. Now, to do that, we've added 5 talented, diverse leaders over that time period. But everything I just said had to happen for that to be achieved. What I mean by that is, 1, we had to think differently on geographical location. Several of them we held open much longer than was comfortable to run a business, but we wanted to find the right leader. And one of the things that I would call out that's so important in everything I've said here, not once did we lower the bar for any of these results we've achieved. We have added what I think is incredible talent to be able to drive and deliver results. The third, invest time. And so as I was flying here, one of the things that I invest my time in is sponsorship and mentoring. And certainly there's a difference between mentoring and sponsoring. I do a little bit more sponsoring, so I have proteges. For those that work with me, they know I certainly spend a lot of time on this. This is one of my number one passions. I was trying to figure out how many proteges I had. Now, I've been with Cardinal a long time, so you build those up over time. But it was like in the 15 range. And by the way, these are 15 individuals that I invest time in every month to be meeting with, checking in with, giving advice to. So I'm doing one very important thing, and for the guys in the room, this is really important. When I'm spending all that time, I'm building confidence. And one of the things that I think is the biggest gap in why women don't step into certain roles is confidence. So I'm always trying to help them understand what their experiences are, how they line up, where they have gaps to get after some. And so that is incredibly important. And I'll talk a little bit more about the confidence in a few minutes on some tools that I use. The second is to make sure that my proteges get important assignments or roles. And an example I would use here is not too long ago at our CEO talent review, we have a really talented female leader. She's on succession plans after succession plan. But one of the things that I've known working with her over the years is all her experiences, she's missing one thing. She needs to run something commercially to get to what we would call the EVP level. And guess what? There was a commercial job open, good GM job that was open, and nobody was having the conversation that she should go do this. And by the way, this is like taking a 180. This is the pharmaceutical side. This is going into a business on the medical side, and several. This wasn't just a me thing. 3 or 4 of the male leaders in that room, we all conspired and said, no, we have to go back in there and say, she gets that job. We got to push her in that job. And we did, and she's about 90 days in, and it's going amazing. And she was super nervous about taking this big leap into what was generally purchasing into true GM. But that doesn't happen without her, first of all, having some sponsors, and it doesn't happen without men sticking their neck out on a line to say, hey, by the way, I'm 100% certain she's going to be great at that. And that's the reason that I spend a lot of time there. Now, this last one has a tendency to get me into a little bit of trouble as to why I invest a lot of time, because Therese actually hit me up with it today. I'm recruiting. So I run really important businesses, and I'm recruiting. And you can't change the C-suite level with diverse leaders from 17 to 36 if you don't have some kind of pipeline to do that. So I will admit I do a fair amount of recruiting. Number 4, work environment. So none of this matters if the work environment isn't right to be able to support the culture that's necessary to keep diverse leaders. It just doesn't matter. So a couple things that I would call out here. This is done in different ways, but my formula has generally been, like I said, I've stepped into some businesses that were ripe for this. So at Kinray, we leveraged WIN, and WIN was our conduit to start to create awareness, to start to do training differently, and to think differently. At Home, we used a Diversity and Inclusion Council. Both were designed to accomplish the same thing. And the other thing is, I hold myself accountable that when we're trying to solve problems, get after opportunities, we do it with diverse teams. So in other words, we think very prescriptively about that, but that's how you start to make people want to bring their best to work, right? You ask them to help to contribute, and we make sure that we fairly get contribution to be able to solve problems going forward. Now, the last one, it's not really an action item, but it's something that I really love to talk about, because everything that I've been saying here, this is all about unleashing the power of these female leaders that I said earlier use 5 of the 9 leadership competencies, and they just do it differently. And when you complement them together, we get great things to happen. There have been some amazing things that I've seen happen as a result of it, so I like to talk about it, so I'm going to. So the first is at Cardinal Health at Home, when I got there a couple years ago, we have 3 different businesses, and one of the businesses, which is incredibly complex from beginning to end, a consumer-based business, was really struggling, first from a results perspective, but also just how to solve problems and collaborate and get things done. And it was like something I've never seen before. But as I've been talking about, we've started to really change out the leadership. We've brought different leaders into place, and one of the things that's happened, and it was like last December, we had a really big opportunity to get after with a new product launch, and what took place was nothing short of magical. Now, first of all, we had some key people that were leading this that weren't there a year before. And by the way, we get through this project. It was a really successful launch. And then guess what happened? It led to another opportunity that we needed to get after. We got after that even faster, and then a third, to the point where, several of us were in a room saying, wow, what's changed? And deep down inside, I was kind of laughing because I knew exactly what had changed. We had changed the makeup of the leadership team that was getting after it. We had put people in a position to shine, to be able to do things. I mean, we have a leader that was not in a position to be successful before this happened, that we basically just forced her into a role because we knew how talented she was to be the project manager for that first project I mentioned in December. It was just amazing. It was awesome. It was great to be a part of. It's why I come to work. The second one, and this one is probably one of the proudest things that I've ever been a part of in my work life. When I got to Kinray, she wasn't a manager of anything. Her name was Angela. And Angela, I figured out, was probably one of the more talented leaders I had ever seen. And so what do you do in those instances? I made her a manager of something fairly meaningful for the business. And she resisted me a little bit. She was nervous. And guess what she did? Anybody want to guess? She knocked the ball out of the park. I mean, she was awesome. But Angela came to me one day, and she said, "Hey, Steve, so the business had about 600 warehouse workers, and the majority of the warehouse workers were from other countries. So she said, "Hey, one thing I've observed. Did you know that in our warehouse workers, they come to the United States for opportunities, but the reality is they have degrees in accounting, they've led businesses, they've done all these different things, and we don't tap into that at all." She said, "So I'd like to ask for permission," which she didn't need to do, but she did. "I'd like to ask permission to pair them up, to do a buddy, not a buddy program, but more of a shadowing program with individuals inside the office." And of course, sounds like a great idea. Let's do it. So she puts together the first group, pairs them up, and we started with about 12. And within 90 days, 3 of them were promoted into jobs. And then, before you know it, a month later, there's 3 more. In a matter of like 4 months, 12 of the 20 we were working with had been promoted into office jobs. 2 of them ended up being in manager level jobs. And first off, that's an amazing story just because there are people that would have never had that opportunity, all diverse females, by the way, would never had that opportunity if she didn't do that, because I had nothing to do with this. It was all her. They would have never had that opportunity. There's another really important effect here. It totally changed the culture of our building. They were so much more eager, had more grit. They were pushing, and people were upset about it, that like we were doing it because I watched the bar be raised. So that's a pretty good lead in. I always like to show this picture. This is the group that had these opportunities. If Angela would have never stepped up, these individuals may have never got into better paying jobs, worked into management level jobs, and believe me, everybody benefited. So a couple examples of the why around just unleashing individuals' ability to go get stuff done. So this is one of my favorite pictures ever. All right, so I have a little bit of advice for the room. However you want to take that advice, action items, things that I think make a difference. It was Heather. Where's Heather? Heather talked about creating your brand today. Is that right? Did I get that right, Heather? Create your brand. This one is incredibly important. So as I mentioned, I mentor and sponsor a lot of individuals, and something started to become very consistent across all of the different leaders that I was sponsoring. Number one, they couldn't describe their leadership style. So that was the first thing. Number two, generally they didn't know what they wanted to do. And then also, they didn't know how to quickly describe how their experiences were building them for future, bigger, better things. So in this process, one of the things that I've used for quite a few years is I just made this simple brand template, and I ask these leaders to say, okay, I want you to lay out what's your leadership style. I want you to talk about what are the top results that you're most proud of? How have you done some kind of transformation? What risk have you taken? Where have you shown resilience in your leadership style? How do you develop yourself? And what do you want to do? Now, what's always great about this is, and it happens every single time when I give this to a protege, they have it filled out in less than 24 hours and sent back to me. Now, I've learned to stop to tell them in advance what I really want, because that's not necessarily what the exercise is about. The exercise is about creating this into a living and breathing document that you're finding some gaps. Because as a sponsor, that's where I help you. If you haven't done and been in a position to do some kind of transformation, let's figure that out, and that's where I'll start to spend my energy. So I can't tell you how beneficial this simple, there's nothing exciting about it, but this simple template around just writing it down, filling it out, and then talking about it and turning it into a living and breathing document. So if anybody wants that, I'm happy to share it. It's been a really valuable tool. The second piece of advice is to step forward, and don't be shy about asking for tough assignments. Mike Hoffman always uses a really insightful story around how men and women approach job opportunities. So if there's 5 requirements and a male has 2 of them, they will raise their hand, and a woman has 4 of them, they won't. And that is a fact. That goes back to my blinders when I tried to get a sales rep to move into a sales manager job. I didn't understand that. Today I would have gone way more assertively towards not waiting 6 weeks to get her into the role. So that's really important, and you have to be raising your hand to get after those kind of opportunities, and know what your capabilities are as you step into them. And the last piece of advice is, don't be shy about asking for sponsors. I regularly have individuals ask me to do that, and if I have the time, I will. Like I mentioned, I have quite a few, but if not, I help pair them up with someone that can be their sponsor, somebody that's influential in the organization, and somebody that can help fill some gaps around experiences that they need as they move through their career. Now, as we've marched through all of this today, I mean, here's the general themes that I hope we all walk away with. First of all, full gender partnership at work. It's good for business and it's good for people. No way around that. Everything points to that. And the second thing is, we all have to be engaged to do it. It does not happen without the engagement from everybody in this room. I have a letter that I kind of want to close it out with, and then hopefully we can get into some dialogue and some questions. When at Cardinal Health at Home, we've been going through a system transformation, and we had an organizational change management consultant that had been part of our business for a period of time, and then we didn't need the engagement anymore, and she left. But she sent me a note before she left, and I wanted to read it because I think it helps highlight some of the things that we're all aspiring for as we think about driving change. She wrote, When I first joined in August of 2016, I was invited to a number of executive meetings due to my organizational design background. I distinctly remember noting that there was only one female executive at the table. Additionally, I was the one lone racial minority in the room. I had never to that point realized how much of a difference it makes, both in comfort factor and communication style, to have someone who looks somewhat like you at the executive level. In the short time since you have joined, I went from working with one senior female executive to working with 4, some who looked like me. Their viewpoints, communication, experiences, and differences in approach are striking. Gaining consensus became harder, but the decisioning, the end results are more valuable. In the long run, this will make Cardinal Health at Home stronger. I call that out because in the beginning of the day, one of the things that was mentioned was that we want everybody to have, we want equal representation at a seat at the table, and it makes a difference. And hopefully some of the things that I've walked through today help you understand that. And just so you know, and I always declare this, my number one passion is full partnership at work, and I'm incredibly engaged, and if there's something I can do with anybody in the room to help, please don't hesitate. So now we are going to move into questions, so thank you for hearing me out thus far. Anything is fair game. Who's got a question? I see a hand. I see several hands. Good.
Thanks. How did you address the relocation, non-relocation, geographic issues? Because that's sometimes you want people.
We figured out how to avoid doing the relocation. So in other words, the business, the Cardinal Health at Home had historically been run that everybody had to be at that location. And now, growing up at Cardinal, I will say we had a little bit of a different approach to that, meaning whether you lived in your market or you traveled in for necessary meetings, et cetera. A couple of the roles, we just decided to figure out how to do it without relocating, to be honest. And one of them is a senior level role, and she lives in San Diego, and we're in Twinsburg, but we're going to figure out how to make it work. She calls on health plans. Health plans, last time I checked, they're all over the country, so she can get there. She has a sales team. They're all located remotely. But I can tell you with 100% certainty, previous to my predecessor, that would have never happened. So in other words, we rip the Band-Aid and we just do it. It's a good question.
You mentioned that there was a difference between a sponsor and a mentor. Can you explain what that difference is?
Yes. So when you think of, I always look at mentoring is helping fill some kind of maybe technical gap that an individual has when you think about, whether it's business acumen or how to build out a network. The true difference, though, when you think of sponsorship is someone that advocates for you in the organization. And the reason you have to spend time to be a good sponsor is you have to be invested so that you feel comfortable to advocate, because you're literally going to take risk inside of an organization. When I mentioned somebody that we reached, a really talented, diverse leader that we put into a GM job, I went to our CEO and I said, listen, I am 100% certain this individual's right. They gain the experience. They'll be ready for the next, they'll never get to the next level if they don't go do this. And by the way, you can choke me if I'm wrong. That's what sponsorship is. And the other thing I would call out about sponsorship, I don't sponsor very many men in the organization. I always just assume they have a sponsor. I had a sponsor whether I liked it or not. I just organically had sponsors. It's kind of back to that white male privilege. So you have to disproportionately do it, or you'll never change the numbers. And that's why I do it that way. Very, very good question.
Steve, thank you. This has been wonderful. I
Thank
was
you.
wondering, though, if you ever get a chance to do these kinds of learnings with men outside of Cardinal.
So I've had the opportunity to be part of many panels, and I'm gonna take your question and I'm gonna add a question to it, and then I'm gonna answer it. How about
Okay.
that? So one of the and it will answer the question, I promise. One of the things I was reflecting on in this, and by the way, remember I have all these proteges, so of course, I share this with my proteges, and I ask them, hey, what are some good questions that I could answer? What are you thinking about? And one of them came back at me, and it struck me really hard, and I had to think about it, but I knew the answer. I knew the answer right away. It said, the question was, knowing what you know now as a leader, what would you have done differently if you could go back in time? It's a really insightful, tough question to answer, but I knew the answer right away. The one thing that I would do differently, and the problem is it comes down to time, was that I haven't spent enough time creating more male disciples. And we cannot change without men driving change. It just won't happen. So if there's one thing that I could do better, it is that. Now, certainly I have influence around my direct reports, but when you think of it, I mean, it's like numbers multiply, and we need more of that. And so I don't do enough with men outside of Cardinal. So the answer is not enough. But I would even be happy if I could figure out the formula to do more of it inside our organization.
We have to get you a Haida gig. Matt?
I was at Haida, last fall. I'm happy to. Other questions? Hi.
Hi, you had talked about how you've added women to all of your teams. Has this impacted your benefits or policies at Cardinal?
So I mentioned it up front. Mike Hoffman, who's our CEO and one of the greatest champions I've ever had as a mentor in gender partnership, we have taken some what I would call good steps towards driving change. One is, I mentioned Partners Leading Change. We've put about 350 leaders through that, and call it 250 of them were men, and a lot of women have gone through it as well. We've added a gender representation, that's not the right word to put it. We've added a multiplier in our annual bonus around how do you drive change, whether that's ensuring that when you're interviewing for roles, you have diverse slates and a whole host of things. So we have some things that we get after. So those are a couple things that we've done. And I mentioned it earlier, but one of the best is when you know that your head leader, this is a passion and a priority for him, it does start to change the conversation a little bit. And I'm gonna answer another question with your question. I like doing this. It's fun. It's a fun game. Someone also asked me, I think it was last night at dinner, which is, okay, so we've put 350 people through Partners Leading Change. What kind of grade do you give all the men have been through that? And so I'll give it a grade. I call it like I think we've got like 20% of those men are really on fire to drive change. That's not good enough, but that's kind of where I get it. And it goes back to what I'd like to do differently around trying to drive male disciples to go do this. So that's something that I think, regarding your question, we've still got to do more, and I have the pleasure of regularly interacting with our leadership at Cardinal, and one of the things that I push them on is I talked about it earlier, and I'm not shy to talk about it. I like targets. I really like to have some kind of target, whether it makes men uncomfortable or not. I really don't care, because I know that when we get there, it changes things for the best. So I don't care. Yeah, please.
Sorry. As specifically as it relates to these people making it more conducive for them, you talked about eliminating the relocation requirement. Have you looked into other work-life balance policies like maternity leave or coming back into the workforce after that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I will say, where I have influence in the businesses that I'm part of, we will absolutely think about in career development. One of the things that I didn't mention that is something that we followed in the last couple businesses is sponsorship programs, like formal for each business. Kinray, we did it at Home. We have a sponsorship program, and we've probably got, I don't know, my team's there, 25 proteges as part of that. And we disperse them across what I consider our executive team, so everybody on the executive team has 2 to 3 proteges. Is one of those exercises. We definitely get to know who our talent is better, and understanding, are there things that we could do from a work-life balance to be able to help them, not lose them in the leaky pipeline, because that's the worst case scenario here, which is we lose too many in each step of the way. So it's a great question, but I still think we can do more. As far as, I'm not sure externally how our paternity leave policies line up to other businesses, but we just did enhance it a little bit last year, which I thought was good progression. Thanks for the question. I got a question right. I got another one back there. All right.
Oh, sorry.
Floor's squeaky. Sorry.
You shared that the talent pipeline was leaky, which was a powerful slide. In your organization, where and in what roles are women in the talent pipeline, and how are you supporting their growth specifically? Yeah,
it's a great question, and it's we just had talent review a couple weeks ago, and these are things that definitely keep me up at night when I think about changing the numbers. So we've invested over the last year in a sponsorship program, like I had mentioned, to where I think we've got a pretty good percentage pool of our high potentials at the director level that we're preparing for vice president level. When I look at our director talent pool, that's where I think we've had the most opportunity to be more prescriptive around who we're developing for the director level. And many folks in the room were in this talent review last week, and we started to think about it differently, where we took away, some companies use 9 boxes, we do all different kinds of things like that. But I'm like, listen, think of it, I want our top 10. Give our top 10 leaders that are in the bullpen for director, who are we investing in, who are they, and then I was looking for a significant, disproportionate amount of diverse leaders on that list, so that I could know that we could actually drive some change at the next level. And so call it, that list was 70-30, 70 diverse female or ethnic to 30 males, and that makes sense for our business. By the way, our business at the individual contributor level is 65% female. So you have to be able to tap into that. And a year and a half ago, I didn't think we were there. I was very disappointed, and that kept me up. But I feel better around the things we're investing in are starting to pay off. Other questions? Stop stepping there where it
Sorry
squeaks.
about that. You mentioned some pretty aggressive timelines and making drastic change in the dynamic. And what I'm curious about is how that was received by the males in the organization, and then how you helped shepherd them through that change.
Oh, that's a really good question. When I think back to when I mentioned to everybody talking about it. Talking about it was the hardest journey for me to get really comfortable with, but it's become a good muscle, and I talk about it a lot. And I will say, and by the way, I'd love to know the perspective of some folks on my team. Coming in, I think folks kind of knew this was something that was really important to me. The other thing is, I have like 3 jobs that I do in my business, right? I try to lay out what strategy should look like. I try to make sure that I have the right people in place to do it. And then if there are barriers, I got to remove them, and I got to make sure the work environment's good. I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's what I focus on. So asking the question around, aggressive timelines and making it okay, I guess that's one of the things that I worried about the least, because after a period of time, when you get the right leaders in place, when you get the right male leaders in place, they get it. In fact, I'll use an example. One of the individuals that we hired into a key director position for sales, was a longtime Cardinal Health veteran, and this male leader who recently just took on a much larger role, he showed me that he understood without me saying a word. He held that job open for at least 6 months, and we could have filled that internally with a male overnight. He knew it. We talked about it as a leadership team. We actually talked about it at our meetings, but we left that open. And I guess the way I'd answer the question is I'm trying to highlight the benefits to it. And I think most men in our organization, they get it, but I have to make it okay for them to actually take action. I have to make it okay for that individual that we hired for that role to live in another state, to be able to manage a team. A lot of the team was in that building, but guess what? We're 6 months in, and I said someone today who knew her, I said, she's a force to be reckoned with. She leaves meetings and I'm running around, want to go sell something, and she's got her team fired up. It's totally changed the dynamic of the team. So it's a great question, but I'm kind of saying, they're on the journey whether they like it or not. And if I have the wrong leaders, I'll replace them. I mean, it's a short answer of that.
That made me laugh. So thank you, Steve. Great talk. I really appreciate it. My question is somewhat similar, but I'm going to try to add on to it as the last woman. When you get into these situations with, a group that are mostly men, and they're comfortable with that, how do you start the conversation with them? Because let's face it, women, just like you mentioned, women want people in the room that are like her, or people of color want that in the room. Men also have unconscious bias. They want to be they don't want anybody else in that room. They feel more comfortable being in that room with other men. So how do you start the conversation, and how do you actually get them to understand that they do have some kind of unconscious bias, and recognize it and take steps to correct it?
Such a good question. And this one I'm gonna break the guy code a little bit too. So I mentioned that 300 and some leaders have been through Partners Leading Change. I've been with Cardinal a long time, so I know a lot of people, and I have a lot of relationships that span over decades. There were no question male leaders that I could rattle off that avoided Partners Leading Change like it was their job. I mean, they had a customer meeting every time it came up. That was, and by the way, I know there's Cardinal people in the room. I have to be honest about this though. We all kind of know who they are sometimes, and I don't claim to have the formula around how to necessarily change what their reasoning is or their biases are, but I have had one technique that I've used, which is I kind of go around them, and you start to but I know it, and I work around them. But the point is, knowing who some of them are, I'm still trying to get good talent on their team. So I mean, I don't just try to import talent and recruit. I export talent too. It's important. Every leader that we've brought into the executive level that have come into Home, I've had two messages for them, which is, I know you're taking a risk. I have your back. That's message number one. If anything gets hairy, I'm here to take care of you, because they're not going to come to my business that I told you had some struggles when we got there. They're not going to come if I don't say that. And the second thing I tell them is, this is preparing you for much bigger and better things. And I work about how do you get them into some of those teams, so that hopefully the best way for them to understand is to see it happen. They're not going to take my word for it. I'm junior to most of them anyway. At least from maybe I'm above them now or whatever. But like, I've worked with them forever, and so I try to have them see it. But you can only control. I kind of control what I can control in myself. And like I said, I'd like to be doing more discipling and mentoring with men to get them to drive change. But it's kind of the elephant in the room, which is there are definitely men that are threatened by this. You hear the comments. You know, but listen, I go by what the results show, and I know what creates a better environment. So it's a really good question. I wish I had a better answer, but I'm trying, I promise.
How are you translating this passion into your parenting?
Wow. That is such a good question. You know, it's funny. So having 4 daughters, I think I have a pretty good relationship with it. But one of the things that I've learned to do, just like I learned at work, which is I talk about it. They just don't necessarily understand it yet. And they know that I'm here speaking on this. I've tried to explain to them that they're going to see some things that they're going to understand in short order could potentially make their job harder. And I want them to be prepared for that. So I'm trying to help them understand that through building confidence in them, that you know they're capable. Because remember, my hypothesis: I think women are better leaders than a lot of men. But certainly, you know, when we put them together, they're great together. But I want them to feel confident as they head into the workplace with that. Great question. Squeaky floor.
I couldn't help but notice on your slide where it shows women kind of tailing off in the workforce, wondering whether that had to do with taking time off because of the need to take time off because of childcare. And do you have any thoughts or ideas for someone who has to stop working for that reason?
So it's a really good question. I think. So when I think of it, first of all, individuals that raise kids are going to make choices that they think are the right choices for their family, right? So no question, you're gonna have some loss. But 2 things. First off, I'd like to figure out earlier how to educate and make the right cultural moves or environment moves so that if they want a career, they feel like they can have both. I think that takes education and thinking about it up front. The second piece, probably more importantly from my understanding, is we've actually got to make it better to come back into the workforce. So in other words, I don't think we do a lot or give a lot of thought to that around how do we stay in touch with, how do we basically understand the capabilities and not hold it against individuals that have taken time off, whether it's just to several kids until they start school and then they want to come back. I don't know if we do enough there. It's a good question, and I don't know if I have a perfect answer for it. But those are the 2 thoughts I'd have.
This is our last question.
Last question. Make it a good one.
Kind of building off of that, I think a lot of women are hesitant to apply for managing and director level positions because they're worried about their family life and the amount of time that those career changes would make on their family life. So how would you, I guess, approach a woman who is worried about that, and what would you say to the women in this room who are worried about that? Like how do they advocate for themselves to say that they can do this job, but also have a work-life balance and, not work 70 hours a week or whatever they have in their head for this position, for the career aspirations that they might have otherwise?
It's a very, very good question. First off, what I like to do in that instance, because certainly any leader has experienced this, I have some examples and some network of female leaders that have figured out how to make it work. I certainly, from my own personal experiences, can't can't give perfect guidance on how I've done it because I'm not experiencing the same thing. So having female leaders that have been able to build out a career that I network them with. But the other is, it gets right back to the same thing I said when I'm trying to have talent come into an organization. We've got your back. We're going to figure out how to make this work, and there's flexibility, and we've got many, in fact, we've got a really high potential, talented director level position right now who gets to have a baby. It's great. I mean, we don't get in the way of that, but we're all going to figure it out. She's incredibly talented, and we're going to make sure we have the environment so that she can be successful. But that takes everybody understanding that. That's not just me dictating it. You have to have a culture that can be flexible and understand that sometimes things aren't going to be done the exact way that they're done 9 to 5. But as an organization, you have to have flexibility with it. It's a very, very good question. So that was the last question.
Actually, Steve, we were just kidding.
We got one more. All right.
We have one more last question.
I'm the last question. Claim to
Good.
fame. So we talked a lot through this discussion. People have asked questions really about changing the culture from the top down. But as female leaders, what are some of your advice on behaviors and conversations we can drive with younger males that are coming into the workforce to change this from the ground up?
That's a very, very good question. When you're moving up in the organization, and I think mentioning the top leadership capabilities around that we saw on the slide from McKinsey around role model, around performance management, I think flexing those leadership capabilities is something that is really important for young male leaders to see. And by the way, the one thing we didn't even talk about is the effect of those young male leaders being millennials and how they think different. I actually think some change may start to happen faster just because of the way that they see culture and gender differences are totally different than my generation. So it actually just good leadership behaviors, I think, reinforce why this is the right thing to do. Thank you for the question. All right, everyone, I could not have had a better time up here. Hopefully it was insightful. Thank you, and I'll be around the rest of the day if anyone wants to say anything. Thank you.
Let's please welcome back to the stage Cheryl Gardner.
So was that great or what? And before I kind of do some remarks I, like Cindy, took notes because then you really do have to listen. A couple of, just from my perspective, there was a question over here about, how do you handle that? I'm one of those that had to handle that. One thing I would remind you of is work is something you do for most of us, not a place you go. So when you are in that situation where you're trying to do that work-life balance thing, remember that. Organizations, remember to be flexible because, as Steve said, there is so much value in this being together partnership at work between the genders. I thought that was a wonderful thing. A couple of other things that he said that I just want to reiterate here is that men and women flex different muscles, so together that makes us so much more powerful as leaders, and it's our responsibility. To speak up when women aren't on teams, I think that's something every one of us can do regardless. Speak up when you don't see women or the kind of diversity that's required to make a team most successful. I want to tell you a quick story. John Bauman, who is my boss, said to me last night when he walked into the room for the reception, he said, I think I understand for the first time. Now, this man has been working a long time. How you must feel sometimes. Because in that room, as in this room, there were so many more women than men. And he was looking. And he was looking for a face that he knew or a man. But he's that kind of leader that he's so reflective that really struck him in that moment, something that he'd probably not ever experienced before. So that I just wanted to share that with everyone. It's clear from Steve's conversation that we still have work to do, and we all need to do it. And I'm looking right now at Sue Holzmeyer, who is our director, senior director of HR at Midmark. We still have work to do at Midmark, and we're going to keep doing it. I loved talk about it, take action, invest time. The work environment, back to what we were talking about before, we have to create the right work environment to be most successful. Taking action, Steve, you do that every day, and that is awesome because well done is always better than well said. So thank you for that. Helping women see that they're qualified. How many times have we heard that if we don't have all 5 things we can check off, we don't apply? Apply. Please apply. And I'll also ask you, if you haven't had the opportunity in the last couple of weeks, Abby Wambach, who many of you I would assume know was the former captain of the U.S. women's soccer team, gave the commencement speech at Barnard College. And it was so inspirational from that perspective of apply and all of the other kind of leadership points that she makes as a woman that I think would be very relevant as you leave here. Find some time, listen to that speech. I love the story that he shared about the female manager that was managing a very diverse workforce. That individual, she took the time to get to know people, back to empathy, back to investing in the people that work for you. You can't lead people that you don't know. So take that time because really, really good things will come out of that. Create your brand, step forward, raise your hand. Even if you're a little bit scared, raise your hand. And build the sponsors. I fully support that position of sponsors and mentors. I think that's a really, really great thing for us. Think about yourself as one or the other of those things and how you can be that for someone else. And I guess in closing, what I would say is it's so clear that we all benefit from a gender partnership at work, and let's keep working on it. So Steve, thank you so much for your great presentation and the questions and the engagement that all of you had here. It was absolutely terrific. And little self-promote, I get to thank Midmark for sponsoring this session. So with all of that said, we're one more, I'm going to bring Julie Preffer back up to the stage to finish up for us before we head off to lunch.
So I too would like to thank Steve. That was a really powerful session. And a focus around men driving change. And I think that's certainly a critical and integral part of us seeing the change that we want to see take place. And have men stood in the way? Absolutely. But I think we would be remiss if we closed this session and didn't point out that sometimes women stand in the way of women promoting. And so as you leave, I'm just going to encourage the women in the room to also reflect. Do you have unintentional biases or competitions that may be preventing the other women around you or on your team from rising to their full potential? Heather this morning was talking about the importance of personal branding and trust and reliability. And if you say something, it's important to deliver on what you've said. And I'm sure most of you remember my opening. And I indicated that we had an ambitious agenda for you. And I would like to point out, if you will look at your watches, it is not noon in Minneapolis yet. And you have already heard from 7 powerful, insightful, inspiring leaders. So on the little chart with the happy faces to the left, you can go ahead and put a 9 or 10 down for my reliability. So, on to what I'm really up here for. This is a week of firsts for PWH. It is our first leadership summit. But with that, and with our vision to see a healthcare equally led by women and men, we felt that it was important for us to also start recognizing women that are rising up and becoming accomplished and recognized leaders in our industry. And so this will be the first of an annual award that we are recognizing women in our industry. And as you can see up here, this is the Ann Eiding Clamar Leadership Award of Distinction. It recognizes a woman who has experienced significant growth to become an accomplished leader in our industry. A woman who has catapulted her career, scope of responsibility, and professional development. She exudes confidence, integrity, and is well respected by the industry, her peers, and her subordinates. She is committed to giving back and is a leader that others desire to follow and be mentored by. And I first want to thank everybody that submitted nominations. We received nominations on just several wonderful leaders. It was a tough decision, but the award recipient received accolades from many individuals. And I'm actually going to read verbatim what was written because I don't want to paraphrase. I want you to hear the specific comments that came back. This year's award recipient lives out the criteria for this award every day. She leads by example and is dedicated to making sure the path that she leaves is clear for others to follow. She has worked tirelessly and with honor over the years to build a reputation and overcome many obstacles along the way. She is a woman of clear vision who has led her company through tough times and wonderful times, and always leads with strength, integrity, dignity, and grace. She is a strong supporter of women, both within her own company and the industry as a whole. She is committed to developing those around her and has been a mentor and friend to many in this room. She is never too busy to help and guide. Janice Dezo describes her as the type of mentor who listens intently and then asks thought-provoking questions that lead you to the answer. She embodies what leadership should look like and is an excellent example of the professional, inspiring, humble, innovative, and highly respected leader that so many of us strive to be. Just being in her presence, you are likely to learn something, and our industry is stronger because of her. It is truly my pleasure to recognize Jonah Lysak as the first recipient of this distinguished award.
Wow. This is beautiful, and I am stunned, actually. I am stunned. I'm usually not at a loss for words. I look around here and I think about just the amazing things that this group has been able to do. I was telling someone, I was talking to my daughter, and I said, I'm going to this women's leadership thing, and I showed her the brochure. She said, wow, that's really cool. I said, this was done by a volunteer organization. I mean, these people just did this because they care and because they're trying to advance women in industry. It's really amazing. And I think about the past chairs, Janice and Pam, and the future chairs, Rochelle and Ann and Cindy and Julie and, let's see, Sandy. Where's Sandy? I was just thinking about the amazing, oh, and where's Heather, too? Just the amazing people in this room. I feel so lucky to have had the opportunity to work with all of you. So I really am humbled, and thank you very much.
So with that, I believe we are dismissed for lunch. 4 minutes early.